Hi, welcome to Entre, Nosotros on CCP TV, the educational channel of Community College of Philadelphia. I'm your host, Gilberto Gonzalez, and today my guest is English professor Kate Brady. Hi, welcome. Bienvenido.
Gracias.
So let's just jump into it, because this is a different type of interview for us, but I think it's going to be pretty cool. So let's start talking about your journey, like where you're originally from and how you got to what we're going to talk about today, Puerto Rico.
So I had a sort of interesting trajectory of my life. I grew up on a horse farm in Hanover, Pennsylvania, which is in the south central part of the state, in the middle of nowhere. And after high school, I went to college in Virginia. After that, I ended up moving to Chicago to do a poetry MFA program there. And then at some point in my journey in college, I took a Caribbean literature course, which really inspired me. I loved the writing, I loved reading, I loved learning about it, and I became really intrigued by the Caribbean.
Were there any particular poets or writers that...
I was really drawn to Junot Díaz and Edwidge Danticat, and I was really drawn to the island of Hispaniola at first. And then when I started reading different people from the Caribbean and different people from other places, I started getting into more Spanish literature, and as I went through my graduate school, I continued reading Caribbean literature like on the side of my poetry work, and decided at the end of my MFA that I wanted to get a PhD in Caribbean literature. So I was looking at programs and trying to decide what I wanted to do, but I'm a person of place. So place means a lot to me. Like if you read my poetry before the manuscript I'm working on now, it's about growing up in Pennsylvania and then living in Chicago, and kind of the way that those two places kind of are the same and the way those places are different. So I'm very much about place. So when I thought I want to study Caribbean literature, there was no really other option for me than to study in the Caribbean. I wanted to go there. I wanted to understand the place in order to understand the literature. So I was looking at a few different colleges, and actually the best program that I was able to get into, and I think the best for Caribbean literature is at the University of Puerto Rico in Rio Piedras. So I applied, I got an assistantship there, and decided then to move to Puerto Rico. And I spent 6 months there before coming back here.
So your journey, right, before you get to Puerto Rico, now you go from rural Pennsylvania to Chicago. Like, what were some of the differences in culture there?
So it was a big difference, obviously. And before I went, I wasn't really sure how I would be in the city, who I would be in the city, because I knew who I was in the country, and Harrisonburg, Virginia is very much like where I grew up. So actually the whole town, Harrisburg, is surrounded by Mennonite farms. So the town actually cannot expand beyond kind of where it is. So it's very similar to where I grew up. And I didn't know how I would be in Chicago, but what I found to be really interesting is I was drawn to the most urban places. Like, I was drawn to the most urban people, whatever that means, and the most urban places, not the suburban kind of areas of the city, but kind of the gritty areas of the city. Like, I went to school in the South Loop, and the South Loop right now is going through gentrification in Chicago, but when I got there, it's a little gritty. And the people there and the grit there reminded me of the people that I grew up with in the country. So to me, the middle of nowhere and the middle of the city is actually the same thing.
Wow.
Because the people have this grit to them. So my first poetry manuscript, which I'm working on finishing, is called Grit. And it's about kind of those two things coming together. So place, plays this huge role in that.
So in Chicago, so you have there's kind of common experience, but then also there are differences.
Yeah.
And then, what in Chicago or what inspired you to get into, you were a poet first, but then the whole Caribbean literature thing, or was it also Latino literature in general?
Yeah, in general, Latino literature in general. I'm drawn to, Latino writers are known for their magical realism and the way that they take image and make it something else, something other than what it is, or Gabriel Garcia Marquez, for example. just was drawn into the kind of like fantastical world that's actually based in tradition. And, you know, it seems fantastical, but there is, you know, everything fantastical has a literal, you know, counterpart, right? Because we can't create something that fiction is really based in, something we've seen comes out of that, you know. So I was really drawn to that. And like I said, alongside my poetry studies, I was reading a lot of Caribbean stuff and continuing just try to learn more and more. And just the more I read, the more I liked it and the more I was drawn to it. So I started hanging out in places like Pilsen, a big Mexican community in Chicago, and just trying to, you know, obviously I was reading the literature in English, and I'm now, you know, progressing with my knowledge of Spanish. So I'm working on learning more Spanish, and my goal is to be able to read like Gabriel Garcia Marquez in Espanol, and, you know, really have that experience, because I think it's one thing to read it in English, it's incredible, but I can't imagine how much more incredible it is in Spanish.
Okay, so you found a lot of material that was translated into English, like like I don't know if you know Eduardo Galeano and stuff like that. So that you found those translated into English.
Yeah.
Was it part of the curriculum at the school?
No, it wasn't. That was on my own. So like I took this class in undergrad and was completely inspired by it, and then kept reading, you know, and sometimes I don't know what it is that drew me to it. And some of, you know, a lot of the Caribbean literature is Anglophone. You know, it is written in English. And, you know, like my PhD program was all in English, even though it was in Puerto Rico. So you have, you know, the British colonies and you know, all of those that are people are writing and speaking in English. But then you also have the French and the Dutch and the Spanish and different things coming in with that. What did you just ask me?
No, about the just finding material, because sometimes a lot of the, like for example, like here in Philadelphia, one of my best sources for Latino literature translated into English and, you know, just in Spanish in general, used to be Borders Bookstore, which they don't really exist anymore. So just finding material was always really hard here in Philadelphia. So that's why, like in Chicago, I know that Chicago at one point did have the second largest community of Puerto Ricans in it. Very large Mexican community, so I'm wondering if that, you know, just finding material was a little bit easier up there than it would be in Philadelphia.
You know, I'm not really sure. The library in Chicago is incredible. Like they had a great Caribbean collection there. And that reminds me too, the Puerto Rican community in Chicago was great too. We used to always go to this place called Jibaritos, and they made these sandwiches that had like plantain bread with like garlic and meat and all this stuff on the inside.
Oh my God.
With mofongo.
Okay.
But, you know, if you've been to the different neighborhoods in Chicago, they actually have the Puerto Rican flags in the neighborhood. And one of my best friends actually lived in that neighborhood, so I was over there a lot. But there are a lot of Latino people in Chicago in general. Yeah.
So then now you're in Chicago and you decide to go to Puerto Rico to study Latin American literature. Like, what was your first day like there, getting off the plane? And
well, I went, actually went 2 times before I like moved there. The first time I went to see the school and meet the faculty and talk about the program. Wow. The second time I went to find an apartment. And then the third time I went and moved in. And I mean, the first thing that you know, really hits you about Puerto Rico before you even, I think, get out of the airport is the humidity. And, you know, the stuff, the poetry I'm working on right now, the humidity, I think, is actually a character in itself. Like, I felt like the humidity was, like, always kind of, like, hiding around the corner. You know, like, it was, like, that guy that was waiting. And sometimes you love it and sometimes you hate it. And me not being used to it, you know, I would take a shower and then just be, like, soaked, you know, after. And people would be like, did you just get out of the water? Like, what's going on? I'm like, no, it's not. You know, I'm from Pennsylvania.
So you wrote about that experience?
Yeah.
I don't know how we were gonna set this up today, but if you want, what we could do is as we talk about Puerto Rico and your experience, if you want to, like, for example, read about that now.
I have one. Yeah, I have one section that I can read that's about like just I have a section about humidity, and then I have 2 sections about humidity.
All right.
Should I read them both?
Yes.
Okay. So I have a series of poems that are dedicated to the island called Querida Isla. And in these poems, I'm using actually the word la humedad, which means humidity, because it's, you know, it has a personality in itself. So I'll just read the first one from this set of 3. Querida Isla, allow la humedad to wrap around the bars of my window until each glistens with your sweat. Allow it to grow with the speed of anything green in your soil. Let la humedad into my kitchen, my sponge, my cereal boxes. Concentrate my life with flavor and damp it until all is flat and stale. Then allow it into the pores on my nose, into my blood and brain, so that cars approaching at midnight are waves reaching high tide, and the throats of locusts and crickets swell and balloon like coquis. The mosquitoes have left my blankets, withdrawn syringes from my skin, but humedad, drug of summer, drug of tin bucket afternoon, and amber street darkness, rests on the lagoon's rim, above the water tension. What sinks below, what I hide from the thick air, surfaces one bubble at a time, and humidity sucks it damp. And then the other is, this is another poem about humidity and about the idea of like everything being always just like damp and wet and never being able to like dry anything. Humidity makes eyes glisten with fever, and you call mine animal. It is in your throat because you forget to pronounce the S as the sentence gains momentum. It becomes an idea, this pool of words, the same as lagartijos sliding up and down the wall. The Puerto Rican flag, thick as baking soda in a refrigerator or a running shoe, a newspaper as a poncho. I put it behind my knees and in my hair, step from shower to sweat, from dishwasher to drying rack to downpour.
Wow. You know, that's amazing. I mean, these, like, first, what inspired you? I mean, I know you're a poet, but what inspired you to just start writing about, for example, like the dampness?
Well, it kind of took over my life. It kind of, it took me about maybe a month or 2 to actually get used to it, to get used to the humidity, because I would walk outside and just feel like I was going to pass out all the time. My ancestors are from Germany and Ireland. Like, they're not from the equator. Mm-hmm. So, my body and my constitution just wasn't like ready for it. Every time you went outside, it was like, bam, you get hit with the humidity. Another thing was interesting is my hair curled on its own for the first time in Puerto Rico. Yeah. And it was like I celebrated that day because my hair, I have to put lots of hairspray in it for it to hold anything because it's like sticks straight. But so humidity, it's impossible for me to write about Puerto Rico and not write about humidity because it infiltrated every second of your life.
What I like about it, I think, is that you captured almost like, I think anyone who is Puerto Rican or anyone who's been to the island, when they listen to that, it's like, wow, it's like you've captured, because Latinos in general, but, I'm Puerto Rican, so for Puerto Ricans, when they talk about La Isla, there's this like, I don't know, like an emotional attachment. So like, you could write, you could do movies, you could do whatever, but people from that island, they have this emotional attachment. And, I felt it as you were reading. I was like, wow, it's like there's this power to it that. Yeah.
It really is impossible to not fall in love with Puerto Rico, I think. I think if you go there and you really give it a shot and you stay there, I think people who go for a few days definitely fall in love with it, right? They go on vacation, on a honeymoon, they stay at the beach. It's great. Right. But there's a difference between that and then going for a prolonged period of time. Because I think if you're not from there and you've never been there before, you go, at first it's a struggle, it's a struggle to get used to the climate. When I went for me, it was a struggle because I didn't know anyone and I didn't know the language. So that was a big struggle. I didn't know the culture that well. So there was like a struggle period where it was very difficult, but it's impossible to kind of go through that process and not fall in love with the island because it's beautiful. And one of the things that drew me to the Caribbean in general is, it's this place where all these atrocities have happened throughout history that aren't even as well known as they should be, like atrocity after atrocity. But people compare like Dominica to Eden, like it's the most beautiful place in the world where the most horrific things have happened. Wow. And the idea of resilience there has been fascinating to me. So, the idea of the island where, you drive through the streets of San Juan and, there's stuff happening. Like one time I was driving my car and a guy was running in front of me with a gun in the air,
Really?
and police were chasing him.
Oh my God.
That's happening at the same time as this like tree beside the road is blooming with like plátanos. And it's like, it's like this gorgeous, crazy, like such a big difference between the beauty and then the issues and the things that are happening.
Were you aware of, before you came to the island, or even once you got there, were you aware of like some of the political stuff that causes conflict in the island? Some of the, for example, like there was a book written called Cerro Maravilla. There was a movie made about it called with Andy Garcia. I can't think of the name right now, but it was about the FBI murders in the island. I mean, did that have any, did you know about that? Did that kind of influence you?
I had like a basic understanding of it. I learned more as I was there and had talked to people. My main connection to the politics of Puerto Rico was through the university. University of Puerto Rico is known for its commitment to justice and its commitment to making sure everyone has an equal chance at education. And while I was there, the administration was threatening to take that away from some people. So actually, for the majority of, I guess, when I came in, when I first started going there, they were on strike, and then we had classes, and actually the end of the semester there was another strike. So basically what happens is they barricade all the doors, and then...
That's what I call a strike.
Yeah, they like there's no going to class. One day I showed up and I didn't know. All the doors were barricaded, and so I saw a lot of that. I saw a lot of the politics of the island through the idea of education and the university and the idea of education for all and that being threatened and how people reacted to those things.
Now, when you were on the island, you were in what part? Santurce?
Yeah, close to there. I lived in San Juan, in between, it's called Urbanización Santa Teresita. It's in between Isla Verde and Condado.
Okay.
So it's part of San Juan, but it's very close to Santurce and Rio Piedras.
Okay. So, like, one thing about the Puerto Ricans and just the Puerto Rican culture and stuff is that there are people that are really white and there are people that are really black.
Yes.
So, like, did people assume you were gringa, or did they just assume you were Puerto Rican?
Yeah, and well, when I was in Puerto Rico too, my hair got really blonde from the sun. So a lot of people looked at me weird. Like I definitely felt like people were looking at me weird a lot. It's not like I lived with American people, or I mean, I was right in the middle of Puerto Rico, like everybody. I wasn't like, because I know there are like groups of Americans who live there and they kind of live in like, I don't know, they live in these nice little condo buildings. I didn't live in a nice condo building. I lived kind of right in the middle of it all. So I got stared at a lot, I felt like. But actually one of my professors, we were talking in class, and one of my professors said, well, what happened in this year in Puerto Rico? He wasn't from Puerto Rico, he's from Jamaica. And he said, what happened in this year in Puerto Rico? I'm like, well, how was that related to this? And I was like, I don't know. And he's like, this is your country. And I was like, no, I'm not Puerto Rican. And he was like, you're not Puerto Rican? But I guess there are people in Puerto Rico who look like me, who live in mostly in the mountains, from what I hear. So I thought, I'm really fascinated by the idea of race also. So it was fascinating to me to learn about perspectives on race. And my professor wrote about the history of the construction of race in the world as a whole. So it was interesting to see, like, people had conversations about filling out the little cards where you say you have to check the box for your race. And for me, that's always been easy, you know. But for a lot of people in Puerto Rico, it's not easy because you have every shade of color. And so this one woman said, I just wish there was a box for canela because I'm
wow.
Canela.
Okay.
And I don't want to be trigueño because I'm Canela.
Right.
And like, so the idea of, wanting to classify color in like, the connotation of the words that people choose for color is very important to people in Puerto Rico, which I learned, and as it should be. People don't want to use a word that has a negative connotation with it to describe their color. They want to use a positive word to describe their color.
And
so,
there's actually someone wrote about that, and I can't remember the title, but they talked about how in Puerto Rico, negrito's always been like an affectionate word. Ay, negrito.
Mm-hmm.
But, now it's not so considered so affectionate because, when Puerto Ricans came to this country, they discovered that negrito was actually something bad.
Mm-hmm.
Black people were treated badly here.
Yeah.
So, I think it's changed over time. But if you want, can you read another
Sure.
experience for us?
Sure. So when I got to the island, I was looking to meet people because I didn't know anyone, and I ended up being invited to a poetry night in Old San Juan. It's called Mi Pequeño San Juan, and in there it's called the Poet's Passage, run by Lady Lee Andrews, she's an artist and she sells all this art in Puerto Rico, and she's one of their best poets, and she runs this weekly poetry night, and there I met a ton of artists and poets, and it was just the most enriching kind of artistic experience I had. There was this community I built with these people who were, all kind of interested in the same things I was, but being able to get to know Puerto Rico through them was amazing, getting to know Puerto Rico through the eyes of artists. Mm-hmm. So one of those is Wally, and Wally actually was from the United States and ended up living in Puerto Rico, but
he was an American or a Puerto Rican from the United States?
He was an American, yeah, and ended up living in Puerto Rico for most of his life. At one point in his life, he was homeless, and he took me to the place in Old San Juan where he used to live, this beach where he lived. And so I'll read a section from my time with Wally. Wally knows the way to the secluded beach, walks on the shaded side of Calle Sol to protect my Irish-German skin. When we pass San Cristobal, iguanas graze on the lawn like deer. We hop the guardrail and step down a cliff of stone and glass and trash where herons sleep, to a cove where only the homeless swim. Each day he walks this path to sea glass and whatever treasures the tide hands the shore. His windows all open to the sea, its white-capped store, its offertory winds. He gives me La Biblia, a South American migrant worker edition, rips out the pages he wants me to read.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Because I like what you're doing with the whole environment, because you talked about the glass.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of, and our artists in Puerto Rico use the glass, it's like glass that's been kind of the water's kind of smoothed it out and everything. Artists use that to make jewelry, to make tons of stuff, and your poetry just covers that. It just makes you feel like you're there. It makes me feel like I'm there.
He makes Wally is an artist. He's a poet and a writer, but he also makes sculptures out of found objects from the beach and only things he finds on the beach. So he has this incredible, if you go in his apartment, he has this incredible art all over the walls, all over everything of stuff he's found from the beach and these found object sculptures. And some of them have sea glass and rocks and shells and paintbrushes and random things that he's that have come on shore in this location.
Cool. So could you read us, I think this is be off, but we're running short on time, so do you want to read us maybe one of the last ones?
Sure.
As closing.
So I can read the other two letter poems to the island, which deal with living in the neighborhood I lived in, but also the the strike at the college at UPR, and it actually ends with the title of the manuscript and kind of the heart of the manuscript. So, Querida Isla, you flood me, then haunt me, like Avenida Providencia during day, then night. When all the kids in baseball uniforms sleep behind locked gates. Birds with long tails have nested in the kapaks, and our brothers have gathered beneath the interstate. Manny sleeps on his cardboard sign, cleans his ostomy pouch with lagoon water and spit. Sand does not naturally slope at a 45-degree angle to the water. Tides wear a body down to its ribs, tiny plateaus that end quickly. Querida Isla, some days words stop emerging from mouths and we place them on repeat. They march around campus until chanting takes away their meaning. They become more than language. Urgency, boots stomping pavement, a bullhorn that sounds like authority, a call and a response, a muscle flexed in pain, rigid against healing, rigid for healing. The words look like piles of chairs blocking stairways, or piles of trash cans barricading doors. They look like a coffee urn covered in wasps, or Tibetan prayer flags. The words march circles around the droning electric of buildings, the library air conditioning keeping the mold out of books, the basement offices dehumidifying their thickness, and Angel waits for them in the lab, typing our histories.
Very nice.
Thanks.
That's all the time we have today. I would like to thank my guest, Kate Brady, and I would like to thank you for tuning in. This has been Entre Nosotros on CCP TV, the educational channel of Community College of Philadelphia. Thank you.